In the last hour, the United Kingdom has said it will provide an additional $24.5 million in aid to Gaza. The United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, joins us now, live from Westminster. Mr. Cleverly, thank you so much for your time with us here on Al Jazeera. Your government is offering a substantial aid package for Gaza, some £20 million. But the people of Gaza would need much less aid trucked across the border if Israel simply turned on the water and electricity. They have the power to do that on a grid that they designed. Is Prime Minister Rishi Sunak asking Netanyahu to do that?
Well, thank you. And as you say, the Prime Minister just a few minutes ago announced an additional £20 million in humanitarian support for the people of Gaza. That is on top of the $10 million that we announced last week, and on top of the $27 million, which was our pre-existing commitment to humanitarian support in Gaza. We are trying to alleviate the plight of the Palestinian people in Gaza, and I recognise the situation for them is difficult. And of course, sadly, we have seen the water pipes that have been previously funded by the EU, videos of those water pipes being torn up by Hamas and turned into rockets to fire into Israel. We have seen fuel that could go to electricity generators and the desalination plants being used to facilitate the attacks going into Israel. Of course, we want the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza to stop as quickly as possible, and the quicker that Israel can be reassured of its self-defense and its security, the quicker the suffering of the people of Gaza can be brought to a halt.
So, Foreign Secretary, just for clarity there, the British government is not asking Israel to turn the water or the electricity back on?
What we have said is that in all the action that Israel takes, they should be conscious of the plight of civilians. They should do everything they can to preserve a civilian life. We are, of course, seeking to ensure that that is the case, and we've had those conversations with Israel. Israel have made the decisions about how they will conduct the military operations in Gaza. That's a decision for them to make. But in all our interactions with Israel, we reinforce the importance of international law and the preservation of civilian life.
Foreign Secretary, you mentioned fuel there. Some very limited aid, we know, has been allowed in, but not fuel. The United Nations has put out a call. Martin Griffiths himself, the UN's aid chief, has asked for fuel to be included in these aid deliveries. UNICEF, for instance, is warning that over 100 newborn babies in incubators will die if they can't be powered. Are you urging Israel to consider letting fuel in on some of these aid trucks?
Well, of course, Israel is not the only decision maker with regard to the facilitation of humanitarian aid. As you alluded to into your introduction, the United Kingdom has been very, very significant in its aid donations to support the Palestinian people in Gaza. We want to see that aid and all the aid that's needed, all the types of aid that is needed, getting to the people in Gaza. That's not just a decision for the Israelis. It is, of course, a decision also for Hamas and the other people who are the de facto controllers of Gaza. And we liaise very, very closely with Egypt, who manage the Rafah crossing, and the international community to try and make sure that aid in significant numbers get to the people that need it.
So, sorry, Foreign Secretary, just to clarify your last statement there, the UN is calling for fuel to be included in those aid deliveries, which are being also facilitated by the International Committee of the Red Cross and the United Nations. Is the UK asking in your diplomatic channels with Israel for fuel to be included?
Well, what we are doing is we are liaising very, very closely with the United Nations. My colleague and friend Andrew Mitchell, who is the Development Minister, on behalf of the British government, is liaising with Martin Griffiths of the UN Humanitarian Organisation on what is needed by the Palestinian people in Gaza. We're looking to support that. But also, as I say, the decisions about what aid and what volumes is a decision that the UK is not directly able to make, but we do speak with the decision makers in the region to try and make sure that the Palestinian people in Gaza get the aid that they need.
Sure. Foreign Secretary, let me ask you about something that Prime Minister Sunak has said in the last hour. He stated that your government has intelligence that the devastating blast at the Al-Ahli hospital was caused by a rocket from the Gaza Strip. Can you elaborate on what evidence you have and if you'll be sharing it with the international community?
Well, we have used the evidence that is already in the public domain, allied with the intelligence analysts that we have here in the United Kingdom, and of course British weapons experts. Our assessment, our thoughtful, balanced assessment, is that the likelihood is that this was done by a rocket or part of a rocket emanating from Gaza directed at Israel and is unlikely to have been caused by Israeli military action. That is the information that the Prime Minister gave to the House, and that is based on our assessment of the information which is already in the public domain.
OK. Foreign Secretary, let me ask you a little bit about diplomacy. We were talking a little bit about it there in terms of aid. But when it comes to the Security Council, for instance, I believe the United States has come up with a new draft resolution suggesting the possibility of humanitarian pauses, humanitarian corridors. Will the UK vote in favour of such a resolution?
Well, we always look at the specific details of a resolution before we make the final decision about voting. We worked extensively with the Brazilians on their wording. In the end, the UK's assessment was the wording did not quite go far enough. Of course, we will work with the United States of America on the wording of their resolution to try and find something which is able to reflect the collective opinion of the international community. But any voting decision will be based on the specific content of the text of the resolution, and that is always the yardstick that the UK uses for deciding our votes at the United Nations.
Of course. Foreign Secretary, then let me ask you a specific question about humanitarian pauses. Does the United Kingdom currently believe that humanitarian pauses and humanitarian corridors are currently needed?
Well, of course, in order to facilitate humanitarian support, in order for people to get hold of what they need to feel safe, and they need to feel safe for a realistic amount of time. But their safety is not in any one organisation's hands. There have been extensive rocket fires from Gaza, initiated by Hamas and others, into Israel. Of course, Israel are responding to those attacks and the terrorist attacks on the 7th of October. If we can create a situation where there is a pause, a genuine pause, to facilitate the humanitarian access, of course, we will be supporting of that. But of course, that does need to be in both directions. And there needs to be a credible belief that not only will Israel not be conducting military operations in Gaza, but no military operations will be conducted from Gaza. That is the challenge that we have here at creating these humanitarian pauses.
So, Foreign Secretary, if I heard you correctly there, you're saying that the United Kingdom would be in favour of a humanitarian pause if both Israel and Hamas agree not to launch things at each other. So if there is a resolution calling for a humanitarian pause from both sides, that's something the UK would be in support of?
Well, as I say, I'm not going to commit to our voting pattern without seeing the specific wording of a resolution. And calling for something and achieving it are very different things. And that's the work of the United Nations, of course, is important, but that is also why we fly to the region. The Prime Minister was there, I was there. That is why we speak directly where we can to decision makers, because the reality on the ground has to facilitate that humanitarian access, and calling for things at the United Nations without the accompanying direct diplomacy in the region will not get us what we want. And what we want is for the people of Gaza, the Palestinians of Gaza, to receive that humanitarian aid.
One of the issues that was raised around the Brazilian resolution in the Security Council was the lack of language around Israel's right to defend itself. The UK has always said that Israel has the right to defend itself. We now know there are 5,000 people dead in Gaza, more than half of them women and children. Do you regard that as legitimate defence?
Well, firstly, I would say that we have to remember that Israel is responding to the largest terrorist attack in their history, the largest loss of life at a single event since the end of the Holocaust, and continued attacks from Gaza into Israel. So we must never lose sight of what initiated this latest military operation. We have always said we respect and support Israel's right to self-defense, and we have always said that they should do so in strict accordance to international law. We also recognise, and we've seen evidence of this on multiple occasions, that where Israel has sought to warn civilian populations about where military action is about to take place, Hamas have actively prevented Palestinians from leaving those areas of danger. Now, clearly, the loss of life, the loss of Palestinian civilian life is heartbreaking, just as heartbreaking as the loss of Israeli lives on October the 7th and since. We want to bring this to a conclusion, of course we do. We want to prevent further escalation, of course we do. But we also need to respect Israel's right to defend itself against the brutality that we saw 2 weeks ago.
The British Foreign Secretary there, James Cleverly, joining us from Westminster in London. Thank you so much, sir, for spending this time with us on Al Jazeera. Well, let's now bring in Sultan Barakat. He's a professor of public policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University. He joins us now in our studio in Doha. Sultan, last hour we were talking about Western countries, Western backers of Israel, and whether or not their tone on this has shifted. What did you make of what Mr. Cleverly had to say?
It was very disappointing, to be honest. And I'm not sure who's briefing him, but he got a lot of things wrong. The reference to the diversion of fuel has not been verified by any other organization. The business about the desalination plant is being dismantled and used for missiles. Israel, for 14 years, has had a very, very strict regime on anything that comes into the Gaza Strip. No pipe has been allowed in that can be used, dual use, with the same, the quality of the casting and so on. So whatever this story, I don't know where it came from, it's not true. That plant took years to build, and it was paid for by the European Union and some Scandinavian countries. So that is not the case. Also, the reference to Hamas preventing Palestinians from moving from north to the south. I don't know where he's been. I mean, has he not watched the news? Do they not give him accurate briefing? How can Hamas come on the streets to prevent the Palestinians from moving? We all saw the Palestinians making the move. They couldn't go anywhere. They were bombed. We all followed the stories about the hospitals. How can you evacuate hospitals? Has Britain done anything to evacuate those hospitals? Nothing. And finally, I think this idea that it is sufficient for a superpower, United Kingdom, one of the 5 permanent members, to only call on Israel to have a conscious awareness of the blight of the Palestinians. I think it's ridiculous, to be honest, and I'm very, very disappointed. And when you contrast the same statement, the same state people 2 years ago when they were talking about Ukraine, it's 2 different worlds. And this is why I find it very worrying, not because of what's going on in Gaza. It's because of the hatred that is now brewing all over the world towards the West, and in particular, has the right to protect itself. We know that. It says that in the law, but also the law says Israel cannot and should not target civilians. To simply ask them to avoid civilians, to moderate their attacks, is not good enough. Security Council, they don't need to argue over the definitions. The only thing they need to say, Israel has got to respect international law, full stop.
Sultan Barakat there, a professor of public policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University. Always great to get your thoughts here in our studio in Doha. Thank you, Sultan.